presentation. My part is 10 to 15 minutes, general overview of Galera cluster, Galera replication in general. And the second part will be a demonstration run by Christoph about Severalnines cluster control, how you can use it to manage your cluster. Okay, first about me. So I'm Seppo Jaakola. I'm one of the founders of Codership. Codership is now 10 years old company, and during that time I have been working developing mostly replication systems for MySQL. Before that, I was also dealing with the MySQL related replication and clustering solutions since year 2004 altogether. Codership is a R&D community, R&D oriented company. We started to develop Galera replication way back on year 2008. And after 1 year of development, we made first public releases of Galera replication in 2009 January with the version number 0.5 at that time. It probably never went to production. We worked pretty hard for the next 2 years, 2010, sometimes between 2010 and 2011. We got the first production installments, and after that, the ramp up of Galera replication has been quite good in the MySQL ecosystem. The team in Codership has been working with various MySQL replication solutions, and the main focus is not only in MySQL side, but also in a distributed computing technologies in general. How we make our living, how the business works is through partnerships. We are a small team, but we network with other business partners. For example, with Severalnines, who is co-hosting this webinar, and also MariaDB, which is the biggest partner that we have in a business side. The agenda here is, first I talk about Galera project a little bit, just 1 or 2 slides about Galera cluster to make sure that everybody understands how it works. Then a word about releases, release cycles that we follow, and finally about Galera management, what kind of handles and hooks you have to manage Galera cluster. So first, Galera cluster, this is the famous first slide for practically all presentations that I'm giving. It shows you in a nice way a free node cluster where 3 database servers, MySQL and MariaDB servers, form a tightly coupled cluster where each client can connect to any of these nodes in the cluster, and they can issue reads and writes to any tables, any rows in the table spaces, wherever. And if there would happen a conflict between writes happening through 2 different nodes in the cluster, the Galera replication will handle this conflict and sort out that nothing bad happens for the data consistency. The replication is more or less synchronous. You can configure your client so that they only see synchronously updated data, so that client session will see writes happening in other nodes and get the synchronous look and feel from the cluster. There can be any number of nodes, so this is 3 node cluster, but you can add more and more to the system. There is practically no limit to it. And when you look it from the bird perspective, this cluster, it looks like one single big database management system. So you can connect to these nodes, but from the application perspective, it only looks that you have more IP addresses, more ports to your database server. If you add nodes to the system, you get more ports and where to connect to, and the cluster can handle more connections than a regular single MySQL server. Galera project, so we started 2008. I guess this 8 years is too low estimate. It's closer to 10 years of development altogether now. We as Codership, we work on a MySQL Server Community Edition, so we take that code base and make our changes to implement the replication API for the MySQL Community Edition. Then as a second part, we also implement the Galera replication plugin. And when you load the plugin, then you have a capable MySQL Server node in a cluster. All our work is fully open source. We have quite active community with a lot of feedback and all requests for new features coming on a daily basis. We have measured like 1 million downloads on a yearly basis. Now, from now on, making any estimates is very difficult because Galera is part of Linux distributions, and it's one source where we cannot get any information that how many actual deployments there will be. But this 1 million download milestone, we have reached it, and we noticed when it happened. So we work on a MySQL Community Edition. It's on the left-hand side of this slide. We implement the replication API part. So that part is in a MySQL source code. And to make a MariaDB Galera cluster, these changes for MySQL Server, they will be merged to MariaDB server, and then MariaDB will be able to use the Galera replication plugin. The replication plugin is identical both in Galera cluster and in MariaDB Galera cluster. About releases, we follow the Oracle's development in MySQL code base. We follow the series MySQL series 5.5, 5.6, and now 5.7. And the idea is that we make at least a build for each minor or major version of what's coming from MySQL Community Edition. We don't necessarily publish all our builds, but it's close to having a build new release for each MySQL release. The last releases that we put out, like maybe 2 weeks ago, are 5.5.58, 5.6.38, and 5.7.20. And there's a link to the announcement. This is actually a security release, so it has security fixes, and for that reason, it's a good idea to upgrade to that version if you have not yet done that. MySQL 8.0 will be in our roadmap as well, but no public releases before an official status for that work. And as I said, so the MySQL side development and Galera plugin development, they are not coupled, so they can be more Galera plugin versions available, and we can have a minor release only with upgrading the plugin itself. The last plugin version is 3.22. In MariaDB world, Galera was originally not part of MySQL code tree, and that state continued until version 10.0 in MariaDB. But starting from 10.1, MariaDB Galera is now built in MariaDB. So whenever you install MariaDB 10.1 or 10.2, you will get Galera also in your downloads. And to use MariaDB Galera cluster with that version, it only requires configuration changes. So you need to change configuration that you are able to make your MariaDB version work as a node in a cluster. And the same continues with a future release MariaDB 10.3. About management, Galera does not have any specific configuration itself. So all configuration options are exposed through MySQL variables. There is a set of MySQL variables that are important for to take care of when you start to use your MariaDB or MySQL version as a node in a Galera cluster. But then there is a big bunch of specific variables just for controlling the Galera replication itself in MySQL side. And we call these as a VSRep variables, right set replication variables. And the third category of variables are Galera replication plugin variables. And these variables, they live inside the plugin itself, so they are not part of the MySQL executable itself. But you can access those variables through MySQL variable with the name VSRep provider options, and you can change all of the Galera replication plugin variables by changing the VSRep provider options MySQL variable. First about MySQL variables, I collected here just a couple of ones to take a look. Binlog format is one important one, so it has to be raw. We only support row-based replication. Technically, it's possible to support statement level replication, but we are not going in that direction. All the installation or deployments today, they have to use row replication only. Maybe auto-inc lock mode, it has to be 2. So these are now the current requirements for using Galera replication. Auto-increment variables are sometimes can cause a problem for certain use scenarios. If you start to use them, you need to pay attention that how you make your tuning. There is also a VSRep side variable, VSRep auto-increment control, and with that you can let Galera cluster to do all the tuning that is needed for auto-increment and auto-increment offset, so that these variables will dynamically change when the cluster configuration changes. SQL logbean, I raised it here for the purpose that you would understand that it can be a really harmful variable if you use it on regular basis, because with that you can tell your MySQL or MariaDB server to not lock your transaction in a binary lock. And if you do that, you also tell the MySQL server not to replicate anything out from this node. And it means that the node will become inconsistent. It will have different data than the other nodes in the cluster, and that can be very problematic situation unless you do that on purpose and you know what you are doing. MySQL VSRep variables, so these are the variables that control Galera replication in the MySQL space. So variables like VSRep percentage, and you can get the full list. They should be 48 today. This list is growing gradually. I raise a couple of them here to show you VSRep on. First of all, there is a link to the documentation pages where you can see better explanation for all of these. But VSRep on is something to pay attention to. It's equally harmful as SQL logbean. With VSRep on, you can turn Galera replication on and off. And if you have this in off position, it means that you are not replicating, and that can be a problem unless you know what you are doing and you do that on purpose. VSRep cluster address is the connection point to the cluster. When you join new nodes, you only need this variable to point to the cluster to tell that, okay, I want to connect to this node, is in a cluster, and I want to do my handshake with that node and get in the cluster. VSRep log conflicts sometimes useful if you are running in a multi-master topology, so you want to spread your writes across the nodes in a cluster. You might want to see that if there would happen any multi-master conflicts with that variable, you can see in a MySQL error log any conflicts that happened. SST method is for new joining node to choose that in which way the node will get the synchronization of the data to this joining node. And finally, the variables that reside in the plugin itself, and you can see them by through variable VSREP provider options, and you will get the full list of probably 58 altogether today is the amount of variables here. Some of them are in a it has two names actually, the component and then the variable for the specific component. Here are a couple of one. GMcast segment is for defining if you are in a wide area network installation, you want probably in some scenarios you want to make your data centers to work as a segment where the replication is tuned so that there's little communication between the data centers and more communication inside the data centers. That's how it's meant to be used in a nutshell. Suspect timeout is the timeout in seconds for node limits. So that much a node can be non-communicating before the cluster starts to suspect it and start probably starting an eviction for that node from the cluster. The default for this is 5 seconds. GCache size is something that usually needs to be tuned. It tells you how long history of replication you want to keep in your node, and it's very helpful, especially if you have a big database size and you want to avoid the need for full state snapshot transfer in the cluster. In these situations, you want to have as large GCache size as possible. All status from a Galera replication, how the replication is doing, is also published through MySQL status variables. So you get the full list with the show status like VSREP, and there you see a lot of metrics. Something important, maybe this is the thing that you want to see there. You want to see that your node is ready for operation. It has joined the cluster, accepting transaction, and VSREP ready has to be in position on. Local state and local state comment, especially to be in a position synced, and then you're more or less good to go with your node. And the VSREP cluster size tells that how many nodes this node thinks that there are in a cluster, how many nodes he is talking to. And if this size is different, any different than you think there should be, then you should suspect for the problems. Flow control is something that sometimes is worth taking a look at. There are a few variables showing the metrics for how flow control has happened, how many times the flow control has been issued, and how many times, for example, this specific node has sent out the flow control signal, and how many times it has received a signal from somebody else to stop the committing in this node. And all these variables, MySQL variables, of course, VSREP variables, and the plugin variables, they are accessible through any of these nodes. You can issue set commands to change the values, and you can issue show command to see that what are the state right now. And this is how you can control your cluster by using a command line, but it's much more easier to use a tool like ClusterControl. And I will hand over the microphone now to Christoph. Or Christoph, are you taking, or is it Jean-Jérôme who is first doing the introduction? Please go ahead.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Seppo.
So yeah, go ahead, JJ. Just a couple of words about Severalnines and the cluster control.
Sure. Thanks, Christoph, and thanks for having us today, Zeppo and Zachary. Yes, so we're Severalnines. I'm Jean-Jérôme, and we just want to give you a quick introduction, first of all, who we are and what we do, and then my colleague Christoph will take some more time to walk you through a demo of ClusterControl itself and how to automate and manage Galera cluster with ClusterControl. So we specialize in automation and management of open source databases, and today, of course, it's all about Galera cluster. But basically, we focus on these 4 main areas, which are deployment, monitoring, management, and scaling. And ClusterControl comes in 2 versions, really. There's a community edition that you can use for free to deploy, monitor, and create your own database advisors. And then there's a commercial version that includes the management and scaling features, and also a range of security features. You can see some of the highlights here in terms of what the features are. When you first deploy ClusterControl, you get access to all of our features for 30 days. So in a kind of trial or test version, and then it reverts into the community edition, which you can continue to use for free for as long as you want, of course. And that includes the provisioning and monitoring. And the management features are then included in the commercial version, which range from automated repair and recovery through to database cloning and configuration management and so on. We support the 3 most popular open source databases, if I can say it like that. First of all, MySQL in all of its different variations, and of course MariaDB as well. We're talking about Galera Cluster today. We also support MongoDB, by MongoDB and by Percona, and we support Postgres also. So that's those are the supported databases that we work with. And you can see here some of our customers. We have over 30,000 users today, but you can see some of the highlights here in terms of customers that we work with throughout the different types of industry sectors. People from different areas use ClusterControl to automate and manage their open source databases. And with that said, we'll look into a few more details on the feature sets themselves before we go into the demo itself. Christoph, do you want to cover this part and then take over from here?
Yeah, sure, of course. So, yes, basically, as Jerry said before, I'll start to show you how the ClusterControl can be used. Just a couple of more words about different features that we have, like a brief introduction. So basically, ClusterControl is a system which manages and monitors, scales, deploys the open source databases. We are focusing on Galera Cluster today. So basically, what it is intended to do is to help you deploy and run your Galera cluster using the proven open source technologies, and that they are tied together, glued together by the experienced team of database administrators who basically know what tools are supposed to be doing, and basically we are covering you while using the same tools, but we have you covered in terms of the management. So ClusterControl also gives you an ability to monitor the whole stack of the databases. So it's not only about Galera or MySQL or replication, but it's also about the whole stack, like the data layer, proxy layer. So you can deploy a proxy layer, you can monitor proxy layer, all of the different bits that are required, that are needed to build a nice high availability picture. So ClusterControl also handles automated failure detection for the individual nodes or entire clusters, because as robust Galera is, it still happens that there are crashes, and then ClusterControl helps you to recover from this kind of situation. And also it makes it easier for you to automate your tasks. So there are some tasks that can be just you can click and run, create a slave, create a new node, something which would require time to do it manually. But also you can use Development Studio that we have included in ClusterControl to build your own scripts to manage and automate your environment. And having said that, let me start looking into a demo. So basically, I'll start with some a little bit words about deployment, how you can deploy or import, actually, because it's also possible to import existing environment into ClusterControl. So as you can see, we support several types of open source databases in different flavors. If you're talking about MySQL Galera, then we support several providers, but before I get to that, the first things first. So the requirement for ClusterControl is root access to the system, the nodes that it will be managing. So we are agentless software, so we do not have anything. We don't have anything running, any agents running on your databases, but we have to have a SSH ability to connect and to run, install packages, run stop services, make some run some commands and whatnot. So it's either direct root access, or it can be some sort of pseudo user, password or passwordless, that will be able to connect and to run the commands as a root user on the manage nodes to manage. So as you can see, we have the three vendors. We have Percol XDB cluster, MariaDB, and Codership in different versions. For MariaDB, for example, that's 10.2, 10.1, and 5.5. To deploy the nodes, basically you need to fill up some data here, some information. Like if you want to change data directory, you can do it here. If you want to use custom port, feel free to do so. But generally speaking, most of the time you just need to fill up the root super user password for the MySQL, and then just add some nodes to the cluster. Like, of course, for Galera, typically you want to use at least 3 nodes if you are talking about production. So that's more or less how it works. So once you deploy the cluster, you'll see it here on the list. And then we can check some how the cluster look like. So basically the first screen what you see is the overview of the cluster. Here are some tabs showing different types of graphs, showing different types of metrics. This screen is kind of this view is kind of like cluster type aware. So here we are talking about Galera. I'm showing you MariaDB Galera 10.2 cluster. So there are some Galera metrics like flow control, some like send and receive queue. So you can see easily how it changed in time, and which node was having some problems, basically. So this is quite nice, actually, to be able to see this those metrics that that Seppo was talking about, like the flow control, the queues, and some Galera application metrics also. So you are able to track it like almost in real time. Below is this basically state of the cluster, so like a snapshot of how the cluster look like right now. As you can see, we have 3 nodes, being minimum for the high availability. As you can see, you can also check the state of the cluster status. As Seppo said, you want to see synced nodes and cluster to be in primary state. You want to see WSUSEP ready on. You want to see like the cluster size that you are expecting to see. And then you can see, and then again, like information about the send and receive queue, flow control, set step distance, which tells you what kind of parallelism you can expect when applying write sets, and what kind of tuning you can do here. Segments, which are again, as Seppo said, can be used to split different parts of your database, of your Galera cluster, separated by wide area networks. Last committed write set, and then server information, uptime, this kind of information. At the bottom, host statistics. Again, latency, quite important for Galera. Information about failed SSH attempts. So if something happened, then with the network, then you'll see it here. CPU utilization, load, network, couple of the most important metrics. And then we have the nodes section, which basically tells you about the nodes, the status of the nodes. So again, I can see that on my 10.0.0.226 node, that's how my CPU utilization look like. This is how my network utilization look like, RAM, disk, and whatnot. So again, the metrics which are the most important to actually see and to track the state of the cluster. Also, metrics related to MySQL, right? So com commands, com delete, com select. You can choose whatever metric you'd like to see here. So it's quite it's quite useful. It's quite customizable, so you can just see what's going on. There are some actions that you can run across the cluster. You can add load balancer. You can add a node to the cluster. You can add replication slave to the cluster. So, for example, you want to offload your Galera cluster for some sort of heavy analytical queries, then you can create a replication slave or slave it off one of the nodes in the Galera cluster and run your queries there. You can clone the cluster. You can create basically a copy of your production cluster for, let's say, tests like QA tests, dev stage environment, refresh, whatnot. Security is important, right? So you can create SSL encryption or both client and server side. You can bootstrap the cluster. If the cluster is down, you can first find the most advanced one, advanced node, which has the most complete data set, and then bootstrap the cluster from it. And there are also no actions per node, so you can have a SSH console, so you can open the web console so if you don't want to leave the UI, you can reboot the host, the server itself. You can restart the MySQL on the node. You can resync the node, which will basically force the full SST and to provision the host. So as you can see, the most common tasks that you may want to do with the cluster, with the Galera cluster, you can use ClusterControl to do so. Also backups, right? You can take a backup. You can schedule a backup policy and have them be executed automatically through the ClusterControl. You can deploy proxies. So we support. So actually, I have ProxySQL deployed here, but we support ProxySQL, AgProxy, or MaxScale also. So there are a couple of different options that you can, that will make basically your life easier in terms of managing the Galera cluster. But sometimes the UI is not enough. Sometimes you want to have some sort of integration with your command line tools. And for that, we also have an ability to, we introduced a command line interface, command line tool for the ClusterControl, which I would like to show you a little bit on right now. So I have my steps here, so I don't waste my time typing incorrect commands. So first of all, let's just see the status of the cluster. Right? We can see that our MariaDB Galera 2 cluster is started. It's type Galera, all nodes are operational. We can have some information about the jobs. It's nothing really worrying right now. And we also have some information about the nodes, right? So CPU utilization, memory, disk, free disk, network transfer, and so on and so forth. So let's say that we want to add a node to the cluster. So what I'm going to do here, for example, I'm just running a command on my cluster to add a node to the cluster ID of 1. And this is actually the ID of the cluster. So you can see confirm that this is 1. And I'm adding this node like 10.0.0.229. This node has to be pre-configured. Like as I said at the beginning, we have to have SSH access to it. But this is the only requirement. So basically, the rest will be done by the ClusterControl. And wait here means that the command will not return until it completes. Because I could just schedule it and leave it and do something else, but in this case, I wanted to see it running. Of course, we can also see jobs. This is job number 6, but generally speaking, let's for now run all of the jobs that are running or were executed on the cluster. So as you can see, I'm listing the jobs for cluster ID equal to 1. And as you can see, my job add node to the cluster is running right now. Before we had some recovery jobs inside ProxySQL creating backup. So that was in the past. Right now I'm adding a node. And of course, this all is visible here in the UI, right? So I can go my activity tab, jobs, and as you can see, my job is here and it's running. So you can see that it was started by the DBA. DBA is a user that I used for command line connectivity. I'm not going into details how this should be configured. This is covered quite nicely in our documentation, and link to the documentation you will find at the end of this presentation. So you can go there and just follow the steps to configure the command line interface for the ClusterControl. But you can see that this user was it's started by the DBA. Previous jobs were started either by my user from the UI or by system automatically by the ClusterControl. Of course, you can also check the status of the job through the command line. So the job ID is 6. So let's just see what is going on. And as you can see, we are kind of coming to an end. So we are registering node in ClusterControl. We're updating my CNF with WCL cluster address. So basically, job is completed. And we can see a node in the cluster to which ClusterControl says it cannot connect to. This is actually expected because how ClusterControl provisions the Galera, basically we leverage Galera's amazing ability to provision itself. So we don't run extra backup, we don't grab the copy of the data and then provision the node and then join the cluster and so on and so forth. We basically just set up this, MySQL, Galera, MariaDB, whatnot, and then just let it connect to the cluster. And then nodes connect to the cluster, it gets the SST. So right now, what you will see here, for example, is that you will see the recovery job, which is running. So the ClusterControl will take care of actually, bringing this node up. It will start it. It will let it run the SST, and eventually it will just complete. Okay, so let's try something else. Let's try to add a slave to the cluster. So again, what I did here, I'm adding a node, cluster ID equal to 1, and I'm adding. I'm defining which node is the master. So the master is 10.0.0.226, and the slave that I'm going to provision is 10.0.0.231. So I started the job, and it will take a moment, obviously. In the meantime, what I can try to do is I can run the maybe a backup, because why not? So what I'm going to do basically right now is I will start a backup. I'll create a backup using the extra backup. It will be a full version. I mean, it will be a full backup because you can also run incremental extra backups through the ClusterControl. I'm using the node 10.0.0.229 for the backup. Of course, cluster ID equal to 1, and yeah, I'll let it stack until it completes. So it will stay a little bit in a pending state because ClusterControl queues the jobs. So right now we are doing the add slave to the cluster job, and then we will continue. It will start to run the backup. We can check what is going on. Right. So let's just see what is going on with our add slave to the cluster. So we're installing Galera software on the slave, so it just needs a little bit of time. Yeah, basically we're making some progress here. And of course, again, it is visible here in the UI. So it's all okay. So we have a problem. So add slave to cluster failed. Failed to add replication slave log bin is not set. Okay, so this is actually expected. So if there's no log bin set on the to be master, then we cannot add a slave to it. But let's see how we can check this from from the command line. So yes, of course, I can list the log and I can see the same output here. Okay, so as it failed, it's also marked as failed here in the UI. Let's just see the configuration of this, our master. What you see here is are the settings which are available in MyCNF, which means that anything which is not available here will be basically using the default settings. So let's just, okay, so it was log bin. Okay, so I'm doing it right, grabbing log bin. Nope, there's no something like that, and this means that it's indeed disabled. So what I need to do is I need to enable it. So I'm changing configuration on my node. I'm changing the variable called log bin. I'm setting the value to 1. It's in the group MySQL D, and I'm doing it on my node, which is supposed to be master 226. Okay, so ClusterControl informs me that node restart is required because this is not a dynamic setting. But first of all, let's change also my expire log days to make sure that we have binary log rotation once we are enabling binary logs. And let's say that we have log slave updates also added. So now what we can do, we can basically restart our node through the command line, of course. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to restart up my node 10.0.0.226 from the cluster ID equal to 1. This time I skip this wait flag, so the job was just registered, and that's about it. Of course, again, we can see it running. So it will take a little time. It should be quite fast actually. In the meantime, let's see how things are looking with our backups. So as you can see, I can list all of the backups created on the ClusterControl. So I can see that 2 backups, one created from the UI, other created from the command line. I can see the size of their size. I can see when they were created, on which host they were created. So I can do some more actions about this. Let me check if the node, yes, so the restarting node completed. So let's just check the configuration once more time. Grep, let's say, use log, so it should catch all of those variables. So we are confirming that everything is set. So log bin is set to 1, log slave updates is enabled, expire log days is set to 7, which is okay. So now I can basically restart my job to add the slave to the cluster. So back to backups. So I have 2 backups, and of course I may want to want to recover it, right? Restore the backup. Of course, you can do it with ClusterControl, and also it can be done with the command line interface. So I'm just restoring a backup ID. Let's say I will use this second one, and the cluster ID is set to 1. So of course, thing is that to deploy, to recover the cluster, you have to from the backup, you have to recover the backup on every node, or you need to recover it on one node and then bootstrap the cluster from this node. This is because otherwise, Galera will detect that there are some inconsistencies in the data set, and it will just shut down the inconsistent nodes. So this will just interrupt our adding slaves, so that there will be some errors. But in order to make things, we don't have time to wait for the add slave job to complete. So I'm going to run the restore right now. Normally I would need to wait for this previous job to complete, because this could be end up quite messy. So okay, so we are running restore. We are adding a slave. So what else we can do? For example, what we can do, we can check some information about our nodes. As you can see, that I have several nodes in the cluster using different services. So the first column G means that this is Galera node. So I have 4 Galera nodes right now, 1 ProxySQL node, which is up and running. I can see the cluster ID, I can see the hosts, I can see that everything is up and running. Actually, this will change in a moment, as you can see, because we started to, the ClusterControl started to restart the nodes. So you can see that first 2 nodes are, first one is shut down, the second one is being shut down at the very moment. You can also see that there is our slave, which has been provisioned. You can see that S is for a standalone, and then it's in a failed state right now because of the restart of the cluster that I mentioned. But again, from this you can do some sort of you can act upon this data. Like you can see if this host is online or not. If the host is not online, you can do some actions related to this. Like you can alert, you can spin up some additional host maybe, or something like this. We can also check statistics for status of the given host. So again, I'm checking it node 10.0.0.2.6. Simon status is shut down right now. You can see that it's not in the maintenance node, and it's not connected right now. So again, something that you can act upon. If you'd like to see some metrics, this is an example. The manual gives you much more insight into what other metrics you can print here. But even those, you can find some useful data here. So you can see, the status. You can see whether it was failed or shut down or whatnot. You can see, the CPU utilization, amount of free memory, network transmission, whatnot. So again, some data that you can act upon. So you can just, feed it into Nagios plugin and then trigger some alerts if some, let's say, CPU utilization passes some threshold, or you can use it to trigger some scripts which will execute command line command to the ClusterControl to provision a new node. So basically, the couple of things that you can do with the UI, with the command line that gives you insight into how the cluster operates. This is another example. If you're having some sort of CPU utilization problems, you can run top, like quote unquote top command across the whole cluster. You can see multiple MySQL DBs processes here. So if there is some sort of database which is being overloaded, you will detect it here. You can also, because the picture is worth thousands of words. Why not have some ASCII art, right? So we can also print some statistics about the queries, about the load, about the CPU utilization, and without leaving the command line, you can basically see some nice graphs. I mean, of course, it's not the same as looking by the UI, but it is still quite nice and quite useful to determine what happened and what is happening right now. So that's basically it that I showed up, that I wanted to cover right now. If you'd like to try ClusterControl, you can download it from our site, our webpage, severalnines.com. As you can see, as I said, the documentation for the ClusterControl, you can find it in this link, severalnines.com/docs. And there's also a special offer for our today participants. So if you're interested in ClusterControl and you're willing to to learn more about it and even buy it, then we can, when you're talking with our sales colleagues, just mention the word promotion, and if you sign the contract on our subscription by the end of this year, you'll get 3 months free, basically. So that would be it. Before the QA, I'll hand over to JJ. So it's yours here.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Christoph. Thanks for this demonstration. If there are any questions, feel free to ask them now in the question section of your control panel. We do have a couple of minutes left before we get to the hour. And yeah, just to point you again to those 3 links here. First of all, the link to install ClusterControl. Like I said earlier, there's a community edition you can just go and download for free and start using to deploy and monitor. And you also get to test the management features there for the first 30 days. And we do have this special offer running until the end of December. If you're interested in signing up for ClusterControl, you get an extra 3 months free. If you sign up before the end of December. So just use the word promotion, and when you talk to our sales colleagues, and they'll be happy to walk you through it. Zachary, any comments from your side before we look at some of the questions?
No, not at this point. So I'm good.
Okay. Okay, well, there's a question here from Jonathan. Thanks for asking it. Can existing extra backups be used through ClusterControl? Maybe something for you, Christoph.
Yes, so definitely it is possible to use like external extra backups and to be imported to ClusterControl and be recovered through the ClusterControl. So yes, it will work.
Okay, great. Great, thank you. And there's a question here from Shai, who's asking how ClusterControl maintains the integrity of writes on tables with auto-increment fields and how it avoids conflicts.
Okay, so basically ClusterControl itself does not handle this. This is done by the underlying database systems like Galera. Seppo actually mentioned that Galera manages auto increments by default. It can be disabled, but by default, Galera does it for you. So basically, in case of Galera, this is done just automatically, and there's no need for any intervention by the ClusterControl or any other software.
Cool. Great. Thanks for that, Christoph. At the moment, I'm not seeing any other questions, but we still have a minute or 2 left. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them now by using the question section of your control panel. Oh, actually, no, there's a good few more. Sorry, sorry, I had to scroll down a bit more. So there's a question here from James. Does ClusterControl work with other replication models?
Yeah, so basically, ClusterControl in terms of MySQL flavors, we support regular replication, so just asynchronous or semi-synchronous replication. We support MySQL and DB cluster, which is like shared nothing synchronous cluster. And we of course also support Galera cluster. And to some extent, it is in a beta state, we support group replication. So there are quite a lot different types of replication. As long as we are talking about MySQL, that is, that ClusterControl supports.
Great, thanks, Christoph. And there's another question here from, or a question from Selesh, and that's regarding the cloning functionality in ClusterControl and whether it's possible to mask certain data on the test cluster while setting up the test cluster itself.
No, it's this feature basically, this functionality basically creates an exact copy. Having said that, technically it is possible to, I mean, this has to be done manually, unfortunately, but what you could try to do also is to leverage tools like ProxySQL, for example, or MaxScale in the latest versions. They have some abilities. Those proxies have some abilities to run to mask some sort of the data. So we don't do it like automatically, but we are providing tools which can be used to do so.
Great, thanks, Christoph. And another question here from Jonathan, and this is around the dashboards. Whether the dashboard pages can be customized so that the user could view the variables and graphs that would be important to them.
Yeah, I'll just show it maybe, because generally speaking,
sure.
Yes. So you can just create a new dashboard. And you can just pick the metrics that you'd like to add, and it will be added here. So yes, the answer is yes.
Great, thanks, and thanks for the quick demo as well. And there's a question here from James, and he's asking whether ClusterControl also works in the cloud and AWS. Or what maybe the features would be there.
Okay, so generally speaking, if you are talking about installing ClusterControl and letting it manage the databases, it doesn't really matter what kind of environment it is, as long as we can SSH into the nodes that ClusterControl is about to manage. So that's about it. So AWS will work either. If we are talking about particular features that are related to AWS, as of now, we have like an ability to store the backups offsite for disaster recovery, like for the offsite storage. So you can define your credentials to AWS and actually Google Cloud Engine also. In ClusterControl, and then upload your backups there. In time, we definitely do plan to add more integration, but there's no clear roadmap when something will happen. So, so yeah, we are in addition to what is already, we are definitely looking into it.
Great, thanks a lot. And on that note, actually, we'll be announcing a new version of ClusterControl, the latest version, rather, I should say, of ClusterControl next week. And there is an AWS component in there, so do check it out. So we'll have an announcement next week with the latest features for ClusterControl. So there'll be more on that next week for sure. Yeah, and I think so. We're just after the hour. Zachary, do you want to do you want to wrap things up now?
Yes, sure. So thank you so much joining for the webinar, and please follow up what's happening on Galera cluster side and ClusterControl side. Visit our websites, download our softwares and documentations, and we hope to see you in the next coming webinars soon. So this is pretty much what I wanted to say and conclude.
Great, thanks a lot, Zachary. I see that there's a couple more questions, but we can still coming in, but we can answer them as a follow-up. So Jonathan and Sailesh will follow up with you directly on those questions. So don't worry, we'll get in touch with you on those. But yeah, thanks as well from our side. Thanks, Zachary and Zeppo, for having us today. It was great to do this joint webinar, and we'll talk to you soon, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.